Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Tiffany Hunter, an energy healer in the United States. Welcome to Life Made Easier podcast. We are going to talk about things related to energy health and healing in the world to increase your energy intelligence and give you ways to make your life easier every day.
And I'm Dr. Karen James, a psychologist and energy healer in the UK. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about how to get out of your head. A common way that I think people describe this is overthinking, and it usually feels pretty stressful, and it can include some tension and stress. And when it's happening, there's often a sense of like I'm doing all the right things, but I still can't change it. It generally makes it harder to concentrate. It makes you more forgetful. It can be harder to make decisions, harder to relax and go to sleep. And one reason for this is that usually when we're in this state, when we're feeling stuck in our heads, we're not very connected to our emotions. So it might be quite hard to really know how you feel as opposed to what you think. And you'll probably also find that when you're in that state, you're more likely to be triggered, feel more irritable, probably more anxious, and also, I think, harder to focus on tasks, probably particularly tasks that you don't really want to do or don't like doing very much.
Yeah, for sure. Non-preferred tasks. I think it's interesting that we call it stuck in our heads because it really in that terminology is everything, right? It's as if the mind has become swollen.
Mm.
I think people talk a lot about the physical body being, I'm physically swollen, I'm physically inflamed, but in this case, it's really the mind that's gotten inflamed and it's out of proportion with the rest of us. And it feels like we've forgotten that we have a body and we're not really connected to our energy.
Yeah, and I think it can really sort of creep up on you, can't it? And that
Mhm.
sense of maybe you don't notice straight away what's really going on. Um, and because I mentioned just when I was sort of introducing this topic about the idea of kind of not being very connected to your emotions, but I think it also can happen when you feel conflicted about your emotions.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I like what you say about you that you often it's been going on for a while before you realize it. I know that's true for me. Sometimes I'll find that I'm making silly mistakes. I get to the car, I forgot my keys. I get back to the car, I forgot my water bottle, right? I go back to the car. I'm like, what is happening? And then it takes a while for me to stop and go, wow, I am really disconnected from I'm ungrounded, I'm disconnected, I'm completely stuck in my head. And what I think is interesting about that is that other people often realize before we do,
yes.
right? Like we recognize it so quickly in other people, but we often don't see it in ourselves.
Yeah, that sense of like, why are you so upset about that? Like, why
Yeah,
is that causing the meltdown? uh,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. There's an overreaction of, well, and it's interesting. It reminds me of something we've talked about here, which is that there's a difference between emotions and
Hmm.
reactions. And when we're stuck in our heads, we are all reaction. We're very little true emotion. We are all reactions.
But
Yeah.
interestingly, this idea that it comes from not being very connected to our emotions, it is often, I think there's almost a sense that that state is underneath being kind of almost driven by an emotion. Um, and
Hmm.
commonly something which we for some reason are struggling to feel or are uncomfortable about feeling. So, for example, if you feel sad that, I don't know, your friend didn't reply to your message, say, and but you feel like you shouldn't feel sad about that. So we often will block that emotion. But equally, it could be, I notice this a lot in families. There's often within a family, there will be, like the really shouty family, but no one's ever allowed to cry, or the really, the family that it's okay when people are sad, but no one's ever allowed to get angry. So I think we
Hmm.
all tend to have some emotions that we're more comfortable with and some that we're less comfortable with. And the ones that we tend to be more uncomfortable with, either because of the reason or because it's too painful, or generally we find sadness or anger or whatever uncomfortable, that's when it's like we give it to our brain. And I love that idea that you said about it's like our minds are swollen. So it's like we're giving all this stuff to our brain, our mind, that the mind doesn't really know what to do with it, so it kind of just goes into overdrive.
Hmm.
I know we have we will have other episodes about meditation, but I think it's really interesting some of the, because this idea of a busy head often, I mean, we'll talk more about this, often meditation is kind of proposed as a possible solution. If you have a busy mind, you need to meditate more. But actually, there is, a more recent view that if there's a lot of emotional stuff going on, and particularly more traumatic, difficult stuff, actually meditation really is unhelpful. And so there may be ways that you're trying to kind of help your busy, overstretched, stressed mind that actually might be kind of making it worse.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I mean, I very often have the experience of someone who tells me that they're trying to use meditation to get their mind to quiet down, but what really happens is they sit down and they get much more
Yeah.
agitated, and then they can't do it. And I think that speaks to exactly what you're talking about, which is that they sit down, they do begin to quiet down, but then the emotions that are underneath it, that are usually the reason for the disconnect in the first place, become louder and harder to defend against. And then the brain has to work even harder to get to keep those emotions down. So it's even more agitating to begin
Yeah.
with.
It makes me think of something we often talk about in terms of like the parts of us that we're made up from. So generally, in case you haven't heard us talking about it before, this is we have a physical body, we have a mind, we have an energetic body, if you like, an energy part of us, and we also have emotions, and how those things kind of sit together, how each is balanced kind of within itself, but also between the parts. So this is where there is way sort of on a more energetic level, I suppose, there's almost like too much energy in the mind area of your being, if you like. So that area is getting stressed.
Hmm.
And we can think of it, I guess, like most people are familiar with the idea that if we say you have a bad knee, your other knee might start to get sore because you're walking differently, and you're compensating with the good side, or your other hip might get uncomfortable because you're kind of overcompensating. And the different parts of us can do that too. So if one part isn't being nurtured, looked after, attended to well enough, then another part can get out of balance. And I know you often describe it this way, Tiffany, like the kind of mobiles that hang over a child's
Hmm.
crib. That's the American word, and now I can't even remember the English word. Crib, cot. That's it.
Hot.
And the baby kind of lays there watching them, and they're attached by strings, or the parts on this mobile. And if you pull one part, the rest has to move. And all parts of us are like that, both between these different parts, our mind, our body, our energy, and kind of overlapping our emotions, but equally within each part. So again, all that, any imbalance in any one of those parts can kind of send us too much into our mind, and then that horrible feeling of just, I can't switch it off.
Hmm. See, look, who says you're not bilingual, Karen? You can translate American to British in your head.
Usually.
Back and forth, back and
Yeah,
forth.
just when I'm talking to you, American words kind of automatically appear.
Yeah, and I think I love how you put that, and I think it's important to take it to the next step and look what's going on underneath that, which we sort of briefly mentioned, which is where, because if we want to stop being in that state, how do we stop being in that state,
Mm.
right? It's not comfortable, it's not productive. We make terrible mistakes, we make terrible choices when we're all in our heads. But if we can understand that we've been we're trying to avoid something, and so we're over leaning on that other part of us because, like you say, one knee hurts, so I don't want to put any weight on it. I'm going to lean on the other one, right? My emotions hurt right now, so I'm going to lean on my mind
Mm.
and let that take some of the weight, but the mind isn't really designed for that, and so it has all these problems. And one of the things that I think, another great example, is that if we aren't comfortable with the emotion of anger, which is one that many people are not comfortable with, especially if you're female, you might, when you do this, you'll transform that into self-righteousness. And that self-righteousness is something that then just loops in your head, right? True anger tends to come and go fairly quickly if it's not also connected to grief. But self-righteousness can stay for decades. And then,
I don't know what you mean.
that's where, yeah, exactly.
Mm.
And that's where you get that kind of mental looping that we're all so familiar with. And so to stop that requires taking a step back and really connecting again to the emotional side, to kind of go backwards in that process and find out what the emotion is that we're avoiding that has sent us running to our minds to take the load because it's a painful load. But it's hard to do that because, I mean, we live in a culture where we've been socialized to do the exact opposite and to prioritize what the mind thinks over what our emotions think, right? Logic over intuition.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good place to talk a little bit more about the what's happening inside us and then what's happening in the world around us. One example I always love to use for this is walking around a supermarket. It's really common for us to have the experience of suddenly I need to buy all these things that I didn't intend to come in for. Now, I mean, I think there's a range of different reasons for that, but one of them is that the whole energy of a supermarket is set up to make you want to buy stuff. They pay people to, how do we package stuff? How do we arrange stuff? How do we lay out a store that will maximize the chance that people will buy more? So we get, that's one example of us getting caught up in an energy that we can't go into a supermarket and have that type of energy not exist, but we can, and it's probably not many people who could walk into that and not be at all affected by it. And if we can understand that, we can try and have some awareness of it, and then there might be things we can do to minimize the impact of it. So it's something that's very external to us. It's not something we can change. If we want to be able to go and buy food in the supermarket, we have to put ourselves in that situation. So I think that's where you could walk out that supermarket going, oh my goodness, I'm such a terrible person because I just bought all this stuff that I didn't really want to buy and I didn't mean to buy, and I was planning, to try and, like, maybe I'm trying to look after my health a bit better and not buy certain types of food, or I'm trying not to spend too much money, and suddenly I've bought all this stuff that I didn't really want. Like, I'm a failure, or I've messed up in some way. Or we can say, do you know what, I'm here and I'm realizing I'm starting to pick up things that I didn't really intend to buy and I don't really need, and probably when I get out the shop I don't even really want. I can just be aware of that and take a breath, and I think probably we'll come on in just a minute to things you can do. But I think we live in a world that's so fast paced, that's so high pressured, that tends to encourage our mind to just go at sort of full speed. And if we can know that that's a reality, just like it's a reality that when I stand in the sun too long, I will get sunburnt. If I have not.
Yes, you very much will.
Yeah. And I haven't
More than most.
I have enough experience to know that this is going to happen. And but I can do stuff. I can put sunscreen on, I can wear a hat, I can try not to stay out too long, I can cover up, all those things. It doesn't change what's happening, but I cannot beat myself up because I know it's not, as a very good friend told me, it's not a failing. it's just a reality, and sometimes it's a pain. And I think it's the same with the way the world around us impacts our mind. This isn't all about you're uncomfortable feeling XY emotion, or you're an overthinker. I often hear people tell me, I don't know if you do too, like, oh, I'm always overthinking things, and it's nearly always said in a really critical way,
Mm-hmm.
that's just kind of heartbreaking, really, because nobody's really overthinking on purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. And we say it as if we can stop it.
Yeah.
As you say, as if it's a failing, as if I had just tried harder, I could stop
Mhm.
doing that. And that's absolutely not how we can stop. I mean, we've been talking um, about how the underlying emotions that are either conflicted or uncomfortable can push us in that direction. And I think in that way we can reverse engineer and try to get us out of it. But I think it's worth saying that that doesn't mean that you can have an expectation that it'll never happen again,
Mm.
right? Right? Like, I mean, both of us have been doing this work for decades, and we absolutely still have that problem. I think it's the human condition, and I don't think the expectation is how do I never intellectualize and get disconnected from my body. I think the question is how quickly can I recognize that it's happening, and do I then have the tools to fix it once I recognize it, right?
Yeah.
It reminds me of the Weebles. When I was a kid, they had, Weebles. I think they may still be around. The Weebles that wobble, but they don't fall down. They kind of, right, this toy that goes one way and then the other way, right? It's never quite upright, but once you realize you're wobbling, to come back again. And I think that's how we work.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I just wanted to. Is there anything else we need to tell people about this, that before we move on to kind of things you can do about it?
Yeah, I think the other issue that can come up, the two main ones, is the conflicted and uncomfortable emotions. I think the other one, it can be mechanical, right? If you take the standpoint, which obviously we do, that we're made up of a physical anatomy, but we're also made up of an energy anatomy. There is, just like there can be a cardiovascular disconnect, and a lack of flow of blood and things getting clogged and stuck, that can happen in the energy too. So as energy healers, we have never talked about it, but I absolutely feel convinced that we've both had the experience of somebody who's having trouble intellectualizing because they're having trouble moving energy literally down to their feet,
Mm.
because there's a mechanical block in the way. And that's something that we have less control over and might need somebody from outside the system, like a skilled energy healer, to unblock that.
Yeah, and I think that that block can be caused by trauma, can be caused by like physical trauma,
Mm-hmm.
emotional
Mm-hmm.
trauma, so an actual injury or a surgery, or that kind of stuff. I sometimes think of it because I kind of picture humans as we're kind of like a ball, or perhaps more of a kind of oval of energy, if you like, and it's almost like all the energy's up in the
Mm-hmm.
top half,
Mm-hmm.
rather than, or sometimes the top fifth even, rather
Mm-hmm.
than being kind of more evenly distributed. And it almost feels like some people are kind of walking heads, like they, or sometimes that where the line is like lower down. Maybe it's kind of on their chest, or it's almost like they don't have legs. And I've literally
Mm-hmm.
had conversations with some of my clients who've come for energy healing and said that, this might sound a bit odd, but I'm wondering how aware you even are of your feet, of your legs, of your hips, of your belly, of the lower part of your body, and just helping them move some of that energy through. Hopefully be able to kind of clear any blocks. Sometimes pain as well. If you have a lot of pain, might kind
Mm.
of
Yeah.
disconnect from a part of your body because it's just too hard to be aware of the pain all the time. And we often do these things very unconsciously. So again, it's not because you're doing something wrong. It's usually an effort to cope or survive, or get through
Yeah.
something.
It's an adaptation that is actually successful.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But then gets in the way of kind of things in other ways.
Hmm. Well, when it comes to figuring out how to undo it, I think the biggest skill in all of this is the recognition that it's happening.
Mm.
So when I've walked my car 3 or 4 times, having forgotten something, it would be better if I could figure this out before I leave to go walk towards the car, right? I save myself sometimes. And, I mean, I've certainly had experiences where I've been in that state for days.
Mm.
Absolutely. So the faster we recognize it, the better it is. And I do think once you've recognized it, it's an indication that maybe you don't need to be in that state as a defensive state anymore. So you've kind of gone a long way to fixing it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, sometimes, and I think this is something which generally gets easier with practice, mostly, is, it can get easier to, if you can just get in the habit of thinking, oh, I'm in my head again, take a breath. And just remind yourself that you have a physical body. And I often find some kind of movement, like moving my body, but in a way where I'm paying attention to the movement, not just running around mindlessly, which is kind of often what we're doing when we're in that state. But, just and it can sometimes be really quick, just like it doesn't have to take a long time, but slowing down for a moment, taking a step where you actually feel your foot land on the floor. If you're sitting, even just moving your feet a little bit against the floor so you can feel the ground, giving your shoulders a shrug, and just really taking a few breaths in a much more mindful way. So kind of feeling your ribcage stretch, like checking, am I holding my belly muscles? Really common for us when we're stressed to kind of be, everything's held and moves upwards, after like our physical body almost moves upwards.
Like we're resisting gravity. I find it really helpful to remember gravity exists, and it's always going to win. So the more I can sort of allow it to win and bring my shoulders down and drop my shoulder blades down my back, the better off I am.
And I think, we're going to have some other episodes on some of them we've already done, some you'll see coming up, about grounding ourselves, ways to keep more balanced, but really, really simple things. And you may have things you've already heard or already make use of, but really kind of imagining you're rooting your feet into the ground, imagining dropping a kind of weighted pendulum down from the crown of your head right through the core of your body, and then letting it drop down into the ground, imagining you have magnets stuck to your feet. It doesn't really matter what technique you use, so try a few different ones, see which.
You'll find tons of them on the internet. We're going to go through them too, but they're all over the place. I also think, and the reason for us doing this episode, to try to contribute something new and different than all of the discussion that's been about grounding and whatnot, is because I think sometimes people are told that they could be grounding, or they could, imagine you've got magnets on your feet. And it feels a little patronizing, and it feels a little pat of an answer. And I think the missing part in all of that gets overlooked is what you and I have been talking about, which is the emotional component. Right. To really understand. And again, that's so much of what we're trying to do in this podcast, is let's break this down to what's actually happening, and what's happening in the energy anatomy, what's happening in the mind, so that we've got a greater understanding of how we work, so we increase our energy intelligence, and that makes everything easier. And if you can understand that reverse engineering is that it usually starts with an emotion that's uncomfortable, or a thought that's uncomfortable, an awareness of something, a choice you don't like. And to avoid that is usually when we boing up into our heads. And so those grounding exercises and all the ones we're mentioning are absolutely wonderful. But without that missing piece of understanding what the cause is, it is hard to reverse engineer it and come back down to yourself and where you really live.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And all those grounding exercises become more useful when we know that part of the point of them is to help us reconnect with our emotions and our body. It's not just, I should be more grounded. It's, that there will be a reason, which might be external to us and out of our control, might be just because we're, really tired because we didn't sleep very well and we're just trying to cope with a busy day. So, sometimes it's kind of just mundane reasons. But both some of those reasons outside of us and what you're talking about there, Tiffany, with the, the difficult emotions, we can then use those techniques to help us connect in it. Like, what am I feeling right now? And is it okay for me to feel that? And if it's something I'm struggling to feel, maybe I need to take some time later when I'm, have some privacy, or I can call a friend who I can just talk through, or I go and spend some time with someone who is the kind of person who will just let me be however I am. Or that we may need to seek some help from a professional. We can't do all of this stuff alone. And I think us as kind of as energy healers, as psychologists, as professionals and therapists in the healing world, it's so easy for us to think, well, I know all this stuff, I should be able to do it myself. And even with all our knowledge, we can't. We sometimes need someone outside of us to help support us feel able, for all the different reasons, so we can feel safe, so we can cope with the pain of it or the discomfort of it, to help us connect in with those feelings that nobody disconnects from their emotions just for fun or to mess themselves up or because they can't be bothered, or there's genuine reasons why we do it, because they're hard to feel. Even if one of those reasons is pure habit, that habit will have come about because we've been
for a reason.
Yeah.
And in that same vein, if it's a mechanical reason, if you're feeling like you really have done your best with this, and it could be a mechanical reason. And in the same vein, you will absolutely need somebody from outside that system to give you leverage and be able to help you move that to a place where everything is flowing honestly again.
Although two things we haven't mentioned, which I think, maybe might be useful for people, particularly if you feel you can't access a healer. Two things that could be worth trying is practices like Tai Chi or Qigong can, and again, there's loads of stuff online, little exercises for moving energy through your body. And, whilst you may still get more from doing a practice like that with a trained teacher, those things might be worth a try if
absolutely.
And the other thing, which is something that we teach, if you are able to access Reiki somehow, which maybe because you've had an attunement yourself at some point, or maybe you have a friend who could give you some Reiki, or obviously you can find a professional Reiki practitioner or go to a class to learn how to use it. But those things can really support our energy system and our bodies to kind of clear through blockages in a kind of just natural way. And still they may not be enough, but I think it's really important to
a great place to start.
Give people different ideas for things you can try, without that might be more accessible, without necessarily having to find, someone that if money's tight or you just live in an area where there isn't much available.
Yeah, I think Tai Chi is a fantastic, or Qigong. I think a lot of times when I see those mechanical blocks, they do tend to be in the meridian system. That is the system that moves the chi around. Yeah. But everybody go get a Reiki attunement. Everybody should have a Reiki attunement, but that you can't do online. Find somebody local to you. Yeah. But go get a level 1 Reiki attunement. It'll change your life.
Yeah, because you can do it on yourself. You
can do it on yourself. It really, really will.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that's helped. I hope that's helped, guys. I hope that we've given you a good sense of why we as a human species do get in our head sometimes, how to recognize it, why it's actually happening, and some ideas about how you can get yourself out of it and even prevent it so that it's happening the least as possible as can, so that your life is as easy as possible.
And most importantly, recognizing that there will be things that, are outside your control. So, don't beat yourself up about it.
Yeah, it is not a character flaw. No. It's just a biological state.
Yeah. Yeah, or an environmental kind of impact.
Or environmental,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. Take care, everybody. See you next time.
Bye.
Hi, I'm Carol Smith, the producer of the Life Made Easier podcast. We hope today's episode gave you some meaningful tools and takeaways to help make your life feel a little lighter. You've reached the end of this episode, but not the end of the ways that you can support us. Please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, follow us on social media, and check out our Patreon for extra content and ways you can go deeper with us. There's also a whole library of episodes waiting for you to help increase your energy intelligence. Take care, and we'll see you on the next Life Made Easier.